Hi guys, welcome to Bridging the Realm. Today my guest is Jane Butterworth, who is a spiritual health practitioner who specializes in the field of soul rescue healing, crystal and sound healing, and her own deeply transformative aura clearing method of visualization techniques she's also renowned for. Her work centers around clearing deeply embedded negative or destructive patterns from current or past lives, spirit attachments, as well as healing of paranormal interferences in buildings, businesses, and the land. Jane now runs Spiritus Exit with an experienced professional team who aim to help anyone with hauntings or other such disturbances. She is also now a trustee of the Confederation of Healing Organizations UK. I've known Jane for a few years now, and I've had the pleasure to work with her in doing some soul rescue work for the last few years of getting into this field myself. And I'm absolutely in awe of all of her work that she does. She's such a talented healer, energy worker, soul rescue practitioner, crystal healer. So this is actually the first time we'll be speaking, and I'll be in terms of how she started this. So I'm really, really excited to have her with us today. And I think you'll really enjoy what we have in store for you today. So Jane, thank you so much for being with me today. Welcome.
Well, Jessie, thank you very much for inviting me.
How's everything today? How are you feeling with the energies of our current September month?
Ooh. Well, whenever people are going to start listening to this, they will remember September, I think, in Britain anyway.
Yeah.
It's somewhat chaotic, but we know that there's chaos energy all around the world. You know, we may centre it in our UK problems. But I don't want to introduce that energy into this interview.
Let's start from the very beginning. So you've had such a wide variety of study into this field of spiritual healing, but you actually started as a nurse, which I never knew. So I find that really interesting. Tell me a bit about that. So tell me about how you first got to know about spiritual healing. How did that all happen?
Well, I think my first encounter with spiritual healing was when I was working as a nurse, as you've just said. I was at University College Hospital in London, and I would see patients receiving healing on the wards. And it was very simple spiritual healing where someone was standing by the bed and holding their hands above the body. And that's all it looked like. It looked really strange to somebody who knows nothing about it. Well, what on earth are they doing? But often they were quite serious cases, and you had to remember it meant a great deal to that particular patient or to the relatives of that patient, hoping that their loved one would recover or at least have a better quality of life as a result. So I was watching this, didn't know what it was. I was only about 19 or 20, but gradually things began to happen on the wards that made me question. I'm thinking, well, how come some people heal and others don't? And I have a really good example where I was a staff nurse at the time, and I was still in London, and I had two patients, and they both came in on the same day, both with oxygen masks, a drip, and both very ill, chest problems. 3 days later, one was walking around, the other was still in bed, still with his oxygen mask, still with his drip. And I'm thinking, how come they've got the same case histories? They were literally the same age of 63. I remember this really well. How come one is able to walk around, same medicine, and the other is not? That's a fairly basic thing. And as a nurse, I was observing this, saying, what's wrong? Two happy families as well. All the factors were the same. And I began to call this the H factor. I hadn't a clue what I was talking about or what I was going on to do. But the H factor meaning the healing factor. Something was making someone heal quicker than somebody else. Even though my scientific mind at the time would say, well, they've had a Ventolin, they've had oxygen, they've had whatever else, a saline drip with stuff in. Why are they healing? Why is somebody else not? So gradually, as the years went by, I began to realize there was something called holistic medicine. And the holistic side of things is mind, body, spirit, and emotion. Once you recognize these four parts of our being, then it begins to make a lot more sense. Why would somebody want to heal and somebody else doesn't? Because everyone wants to get better. on the whole.
Yeah.
But it started to wake up that part of me. Now, I grew up in a psychic household. My mother was clairvoyant.
Oh, wow.
She hated it. She was so scared of it. It really did freak her out.
Really?
And she went to church regularly. She'd go down on her knees and prayed literally to God that it wasn't a devil talking to her, or she wasn't seeing devil shapes. Well, she wasn't. She was seeing ghosts. She was that, but it scared her. So I had to combat that as I was growing, because I wasn't actually afraid. Once I was older, I was curious. I found this, what's going on here? What are ghosts, really?
As we all do. Yeah.
Yeah, well, when I was a child, I was scared. I have a good memory of being under the bedclothes. We had blankets and sheets in those days.
Yeah.
I had about 6 cuddly toys to protect me, and I was really aware of being stared at as I was in bed. So I was under the bedclothes. I want to go to sleep. Go away, go away. And I was only a kid. I'm talking about 6 years old, 7 years old. Young. So that bit, yes, it was scary. But I went through my teenage years and began to get quite sort of into the psychic stuff. It was a bit exciting. And I found that psychically I was actually able to read people's minds. And I don't mean that in a creepy way. I couldn't literally
read my mind.
Because that is actually an intrusion anyway. Not that I would have known that as a kid, but I would recognize, I'd have that psychic empathy of knowing what they're really feeling. I again had no idea where that gift would take me later.
Yeah. How did you realize? Sorry, how did you realize? When did you realize that? What was the thing that you thought? Because for me, normally I would think, well, these are my thoughts. I would just think, oh, why am I thinking about this stuff? But I wouldn't really connect the two things together. So at what point did you think, oh, maybe I'm picking up on this person's feelings?
Oh, well, I can remember exactly, because it became a bit of a game with some friends. I was about 10. I was away at boarding school, and this is when I was at the Royal Ballet School. I've done quite a few things in my life.
Yeah.
The game we played, I would, as I know now, I would tune into their minds, and they'd be projecting a thought, and I'd pick up on it. I'd say, "You're thinking this, you're thinking that," and they go, "Oh, scary!"
How did you know that?
So it's just a game, and that's as far as it went.
Yeah.
So one thing led to another. That amalgamation of the allopathic medical side of nursing.
Yeah.
And then the psychic side of me growing as I let go of the fear and the nonsense. And a bit later on, I've started reading books. We all begin by reading books on psychic stuff, healing stuff, spirituality. It's where we begin. And there was one very formative book I picked up from the local library. And it was called Doors of the Mind. And it was by Michael Bentine. Now, Michael Bentine is known as a comedian and actor. He was in part of the original Goons with Peter Sellers and Spike Milligan and Harry Seacombe. He did Potty Time for the Children. He did lots of Hollywood movies.
Yeah.
But what a lot of people don't know, unless you read his books, is he was an intelligence officer during the war, and he also knew Lord Dowding very well.
Yeah.
Lord Dowding was an air vice marshal, something like that, very high up. And he also became a spiritualist and deeply interested in the spirit world, and has written books on it. So these two got on really well because they both had mutual interests in spirituality, but they didn't know it until they got talking. And most people don't realize that Michael Bentine was a first-class healer and psychic. Now, in his books, having read his books, I thought, well, if men like this, highly intelligent men, are able to believe in this stuff in a sensible way, who am I to judge? Who am I to think, oh, this must be a load of rubbish? Yeah. So I let go a more childish way, and I allowed myself to explore and learn. And very quickly, once I'd opened those sort of doors, like Michael's doors of the mind, doors to my life, then the doors started swinging open rapidly. I also met him a few years later,
Yeah, you mentioned.
Fabulous. I had a long conversation with him. He was the most gorgeous man. So I will always look back. And if I ever write an autobiography, I will call it, as a subtitle, It's All Michael Bentine's Fault.
Oh.
Because he was just one of those amazing gentlemen who was very, very wise.
Yeah.
He talked to ancient tribes in Peru, where part of his family had come from, and around the world. He was wise and clever and wonderful to talk to.
Yeah.
So from that lovely, wise springboard, I've always sought out wise teachers. And I think if people are thinking of developing, we can experiment, we can go around the different workshops and so on, but we must try and use our heads as well as our hearts in judging and being discerning. And it's not wrong to go along to a course that kind of left you thinking, didn't really enjoy that, because you will take something away. You will learn from that. I remember learning from one clairvoyant who I went away thinking, well, you know what, I didn't really enjoy those classes I went to, but I have learned how not to run a class. I have learned how to be a good teacher by the example not set by this person.
Yeah.
So we can learn from the negative as well as the positive experiences.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, everything is an experience at the end of the day. Whether it's positive or negative, I guess that's down to you to decide. But yeah, everything.
Yeah, you may not like it at the time, but with hindsight, you know, it's
totally. No, wow, I find that so interesting, and I really, it's really interesting, like what you said. You know, someone like Michael Bennington, who wrote this book. I mean, a lot of people didn't know that he had this spiritual side to him, right? Which is, I find with so many people, especially like people like, for example, Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote this, what was it? Yeah, the Sherlock Holmes. Yeah, I mean, everyone knows him with Sherlock Holmes, but not many people know that he actually founded the College of Psychic Studies in London. So it's like, wow, this is such a huge, that was such a huge part of his life. And I think
thinking intelligent people, you know, who weren't going to just rubbish everything just because they can't prove it. But once you do get into it, you do start getting proof. But from a scientific point of view, it's anecdotal, because there isn't enough people talking about it until you draw it out of them. And then they say, well, actually, yes, I've had that experience too. But they're not going to start telling everyone. But it's growing, and that attitude has really changed. Attitude towards healing has really changed. Spirituality, we're much more, I was going to say free and easy, but that sounds a bit loose. I think we're much more open to trying to understand, to be a little bit more tolerant. Obviously, I'm not saying everybody is like that, but at least that those doors are opening. And if you stay grounded and level-headed, as I said earlier, try to go to learn from the wise people out there, and there are lots of wonderful, wonderful people out there, then you will begin to form your own path. And I think modern spirituality is about forming your own path that's comfortable for you to follow. And one of the big areas of that is learning to respect others on their paths and not judge them, because that's their path. That's what's right for them, but it may not be right for you, and that is okay. So
no, I completely agree with that. And I think that's also like one of the most challenging parts for me. It's been to understand that, and to understand that not everyone is on the same path as you, and not everyone is really at a point where they can understand what you're saying or kind of meet you at that same level. So it's really important not to push your opinions as much as you want and as much as you know it's going to help people. It's so hard
because you get quite sort of evangelistic about it, using a religious phrase. But you know, if I go to a drinks party, you know, I've got perhaps a drink in my hand, whatever that drink might be, and people might say, well, what do you do for a living? I sort of use my senses and my common sense, and sometimes I'll just say, oh, I'm retired, or I will say, I might adventure to go and saying, I teach meditation. And sometimes they'll just glaze over at that, and I'm thinking, okay, let's just stop there, because there's no point in pushing the rest of it, because they're going to run a mile. And you know, that's a social situation, and I think we have to learn when is it correct to talk about these things and when is it not. because if you alienate people from the beginning, you'll frighten them.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's actually a very spiritual thing to do. I think people need to learn at their own pace.
Yeah.
You know, and if they really need to learn, if they really need to know, they'll ask and they'll come back to you.
Exactly.
As they do.
Yeah, no, I totally find the same, because it's kind of like, it's almost like if something resonates with you, even though you don't understand it, it will kind of keep coming back to you, and then to the point where you kind of go back to that person and ask, oh, so what was that thing that you mentioned you did again, and you know, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or they'll say to me a few years later, if they've become a client, they might say, you said whatever, and I didn't mean a thing to me. I don't know what you were talking about. Oh, my goodness me, I do understand now. And so that seed was dropped, and it was enough just to unlock their door. I'm using that word a lot at the moment, to unlock that door to help them open up their spiritual side. And, you know, we were talking earlier about the holistic model of healing. We're not just the mind, the emotions, and the body. We are spirit. We are a spirit inside our bodies. And that is a very tough call to be, you know, to incarnate, to come down as a baby. We haven't any memory, normally, haven't got any memory of any other times. We're thinking, we wake up and we start yelling at the age of 2, because we're very frustrated. We have the terrible 2s, because I think we're still very linked to our spiritual origin at that point. And I'm sure that's one of the roots of the terrible 2s, the tantrums that people go through. And, you know, we're going forward in time as we get older and older, and that spirit is trying to wake up. And again, you get that in the teenage years when people become very angry. They are developing, they're getting older, but nobody's wanting to listen to them. They're putting them down. Now, that's not to condone bad behavior, but it's just to sort of give a slightly different view on what the spirit is going through, incarnating into a human body with all the human traumas and challenges and politics and all this rubbish we've got around us at the moment, all around the world, not just here in Britain.
Everywhere.
Casey Brad. But you know, it's a tough call being a human being, especially if we don't acknowledge we have a spiritual side to ourselves. But when we do, it's a lovely revelation, and it's a lovely path to be on. It really does lift you, and it lifts you out of the pain or the depression or whatever other stuff you go through, because everybody goes through this. You know, people are talking about mental health now as if it's something new. Everybody at some point has had depression, you know, and they may not have always recognized it. They might have gone through a really angry phase and thought, oh, I'm just angry. No, that's a form of depression. It sometimes inverts as an anger thing. Otherwise, you collapse down and becomes a depression thing where you can't communicate with people. So it's a wonderful thing to wake up to your spirituality, because whether you don't have to be a psychic or a healer as I am, but if you just acknowledge you have that side to you, your whole system goes into a much better balance. As I say, mind, body, spirit, and emotion. And it gives your body and your mind a much better chance of healing if you start to deteriorate, or you know, in your health, or you've inherited some health problem, or you've had a sudden accident. You know, all these possibilities will almost certainly happen at some point in your life, because we're living in a physical world, and it has an awful lot of threat surrounding it. But when you work with your spirituality, you can also learn how to protect yourself, and you protect yourself energetically, so you can at least minimize the impact of all the negativity that surrounds us. I actually put myself in a traveling pyramid, for instance, when I'm in the car. And I make a bit of a joke about this to my clients, but I ask that I am protected from accident, ill intent, or anyone of authority spotting me being naughty.
That's a good one.
So, you know, if I wasn't watching my speed, which I am actually pretty good about that, but if I wasn't, you know, say the speed limit has suddenly gone down to 30 from 40 and I hadn't spotted that, if there's a camera there, hopefully I'll get some sort of alert, you know, psychically, Jane, there's a camera coming up again, come ahead, you know, do not realize, slow down.
Slow down. That's a really good. I've heard quite a few people say that they either imagine like a bubble, protective bubble around the car or something similar. That's a really good. Yeah, I think that's a really good practice to do while you're.
I do it every time.
Yeah.
Not for a tiny journey of 5 minutes, but if I a bit more than 5 minutes, but
If
if
traveling
I,
for a long time, yeah.
yes, a good journey, I will put that pyramid of protection up. And I actually see what it, because I'm a crystal healer, I guess that's given to me as a crystal pyramid,
Oh,
and I will see what it's made of. It's often lined with gold as well, which is a big protective element to work with.
okay.
But I'll often get a crystal that I don't think actually exists here on planet Earth, which I find quite interesting.
Oh,
And
wow.
one of those is red lapis lazuli. Lapis lazuli, by its very name, lazuli is blue,
Yeah.
with flecks of pyrite going through it. But I will get it as a red one.
Oh, wow.
And red can often be quite a protective colour to use, or a colour of fortune, depending on your belief system.
Yeah.
So I don't think we've ever found the red version of lapis here. So
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter. And then that gets crowned at the top of that pyramid with a ceiling, kind of a crystal, usually a diamond or
Oh,
something like
wow.
that.
So do you just literally imagine it? It just comes into your mind. It's like, it's red, like red color, red crystal.
Yeah, I will do it before I drive, because obviously a bit dumb to be driving at the same time. So sorry, officer, I was just putting up my pyramid. Yeah, I'm sorry I skidded off the road.
Yeah. Sorry, that's why I had the accident.
I
Yeah.
have a friend who actually did get stopped by the police for speeding down Dorking High Street, because I used to run my Pendragon group, development group in Dorking at one stage. And she managed to sweet talk them. She said, because they thought she'd been drinking, she was very mellow and
Oh,
happy. And they made her, and she said, you never guess what I've actually been doing. They go, tell me, madam. I've been to a meditation group. Well, would you still please blow into the breathalyzer test? So she did, and it was absolutely fine, of course. And then she got chatting about spirituality, and guess what? They were interested.
oh
So
my
they
God.
let her off, and off she
Wow.
went. So, so I
Okay,
digress.
that's the new way to get yourself out of a ticket.
Well, I don't know, work for her, but
Yeah. I'm sure some people listening are going to try that in the future, but yeah, I know, so I certainly will. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it is so interesting, because you never know, as much as you think someone wouldn't be interested in that, judged on their appearance, for example, and you start talking, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh my God, I used to go to this like meditation group ages ago, or my mom was a psychic or something like that, and you're just like, wow, there is a way to connect somehow with this in this field. I find there's
yeah,
always some
people
interest.
from all walks of life, and will contact me. I literally had a doctor ring me up a couple of days ago to
Oh,
sort out
wow.
a problem
Oh,
that
wow.
this person has got
Oh,
with the place they work at. So that's as far as I'm going to say.
yeah.
So I thought, gosh, that's wonderful to have that openness. But
Yeah.
again,
So
a lot of
yeah, so they were a
medical.
doctor. And yeah, I find that fascinating, especially people who are both in the medical field and in the sort of spiritual field, because it's, we always tend to think of it as the two complete opposites, but actually they're not, because I mean, you've done it yourself, so you know how related
Exactly.
they
When
are.
you're working with people and you're seeing them close to death, and you're seeing what they experience as they get near to death, you start thinking there is something else going on here. A good example is my godmother. She had what's called a near-death experience, and she actually had several. She was very, very ill over her years, although she managed to make it into her late 70s. But she had an operation, and she had the classic thing where she came out of her body during this very serious kidney operation, and she saw the surgeons working on her. She didn't like that, and she caused herself to travel, and she went down a corridor, and it's a typical picture that people have repeated. They've
Yeah.
looked on top of cupboards, old-fashioned cupboards, because we don't get these sort of cupboards anymore
Yeah.
in hospitals. It's all very slick. But
Yeah.
on top of the cupboard was the proverbial slipper.
Oh.
Um, and I've heard this story elsewhere as well, and she certainly didn't know anything about this sort of thing. And when she came round, she pointed out to the surgeon, I know what you were talking about during my operation. He went, yeah.
Yeah.
And she said, no, you're talking about your holiday. And he went, ooh.
Oh.
Now, the brain is capable of hearing. That's the last thing we lose as we're conking out, is our hearing. So it's possible she was hearing. But then she said, but I can also prove it to you. There's a slipper on top of that cupboard down that corridor. And of course, I haven't been able to travel out of my bed, so how could I know that? So just to please her, they got the step ladder, they looked, and there was the slipper. So they had to believe. Now this is, I don't know, 40, how old, long gone, 40, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
But when she told me this story, you know, I thought, oh, wow. And she was one of these beautiful people in life. And she wasn't prone to exaggeration, but she just accepted it happened to her. She couldn't explain it, you know.
Wow. I've heard so many of these stories, like over and over again.
Yes.
So many people who've had similarly like near death experiences, and they would say, you know, I traveled out of my body. I saw my great grandmother who I've never met in my life, but she told me all these things. And you just think, wow, there's just so much proof of the life, you know, afterlife. So it's just crazy to me that some people still actually don't believe in it. But yeah, I guess that's just
experienced it. And I think it's again that thing, you know, we can believe in it because we have had experience, or we've talked to people who we trust.
Yeah.
But when you haven't had any of that, or maybe getting quite deep now, you may have a past life fear of the paranormal or of spirituality. You may have been persecuted for your alternative religious beliefs, and you have that scar, and you come into perhaps this life to overcome that. You might even have been burnt at the stake, and the last thing you're going to do is start getting into this stuff, because guess what happened last time? But this is the wonderful thing about going into the 21st century. We are blessed. In the Western world anyway, we are generally free to practice what we would like to practice, what we would like to explore. And of course, so long as we do not hurt others. Yeah. And that's a wee bit of a problem with some groups around the world who become quite dogmatic. But we're all learning. And you know, we may condemn certain groups for behaving in a certain way, but they too have to learn. And we can learn from their dark side. To enhance our light side.
Yeah, totally. So tell me a little bit about that, because a big part of your work is sort of doing soul rescue and working a little bit, or at least understanding the darker side of the sort of spiritual world.
Yeah.
I mean, well, first of all, how would you describe soul rescue for anyone who doesn't know about it? What is soul rescue?
Soul rescue healing is a very profound form of spiritual healing. We are healing the spirit, but soul rescue, we are trying to rescue the soul. And it could be your own soul that is incarnate as you right now, you know, the Jane within the Jane, the Desi within the Desi, going through your traumas, whatever it is, and your challenges. So we'll try and rescue you to get you back on track. But it can also be about rescuing souls that are attached to you. We sometimes get spirit attachments to the aura, which is this bubble of energy around us that's made up of mind, body, spirit, and emotion, as we discussed earlier. And they can get entangled as if we are like a spider's web. And the job of the soul rescue healer is to rescue not just our own souls or the soul of our client, but also any attachments, which could be any form of spirit. It could be a human type spirit who's got what we call earthbound or stuck. It could be a member of what I will loosely call the fairy kingdom. It's also known as the elemental kingdom, and there are many, many layers to that. And when we talk about dark and light, we're not talking about good and evil. We're talking about those who are very fluffy and gentle sorts, and those who are tough and won't take any nonsense. I always, when I talk about the light and the dark, if I'm trying to explain this to people, a good example is if you've got a riot brewing in a prison, are you going to send in a lovely, sweet nun to say, now boys, just calm down, because that ain't going to work? It might sort of stop them in their tracks briefly, but if they're really venomous and want to have a good old punch up, or they've got something against the prison officers, they won't listen for too long. So what you want is the prison officer. You want the prison officer to go in, fold his arms, or whatever, you know, body language they're taught to do, and say, right, you lot, calm down, stop. You need that toughness. So the sweet nun is the light, the tough prison officer is the dark. And I've met prison officers, they're not mean and horrid, they're just tough. because they have to be.
Because they have
So
to.
that's a simple way of looking at it.
No, that's a really good way of explaining it, and it definitely kind of allows us to view the whole good and bad thing in a completely different way, because you do need to have balance at the end of the day, because there are energies which are a little bit more negative, and there are energies that are a bit more positive. So you need to have balance for both of them, right?
Yes,
I guess in
absolutely.
the world that we live in. But that's
I think that's why we have this world. I think that's why planet Earth is here as a learning place, and has been for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. I mean, archaeology is one of my pet loves, and we're unearthing stuff more and more, partly because there is a bit more money in it now, but also because a lot of volunteers are willing to give their time to do these digs around the world. And they are finding ancient structures 10,000 years old that are magnificently built, albeit in rubble form, but big slabs which are ridiculous for people 10,000 years ago to have been able to create.
Yeah.
So what else is there that's got buried and buried and buried? Because as things on our Earth is almost getting bigger with all the stuff that lands on top of it, which is why we have to dig to find all these foundations. So, you know, I think for thousands of years, mankind has been here in whatever form that is. And I do think we're here as a school, as a, you know, to learn, and to learn what it's like to see the dark on the bad side, but to be able to face darkness on the bad side. So we can do it without losing our integrity, and actually learn how to overcome bad things that happen to us, and learn to forgive and move on. And by example, show that example to others as well. It's very basic. All the sort of the modern religions and the ancient ones have that, but it's humankind that wreck it. It's our human egos. It's that bad side, that ego side, that power-hungry side that searches for power and distorts those good teachings.
Yeah, totally. And I guess, like you mentioned before as well, it's about us kind of believing in that illusion that we are only just the physical and there's nothing outside of that physical. But actually, in reality, we have the spiritual, the emotional, the mental, you know, and then the physical. So it's kind of like if we allow ourselves, yeah. So if we allow ourselves to kind of look at all of these, not just the one which is so, you know, minor compared to the other three, then you have a much bigger picture. And I've definitely found that in my own sort of spiritual journey of just finding my perspective has just, like, my horizon has just like opened so much by learning about the spiritual side of things and the energy side of things. Yeah. Wow. So let me ask you this: what was it like when you first found out that there is an afterlife, and sort of when you started developing your own psychic abilities? Because like you said, your mom was psychic, but I guess you didn't practice that when you were young, right? So when...
No, certainly not. She went to church every week. She honestly thought the devil was interfering.
Wow.
You know, we were C of E, Church of England, so Protestant, so we didn't... our beliefs were meant to be more moderate, but in her case, I think we would call her high church. You know, it was everything to do with God, nothing to do with the devil, or anything in between. You know, it's kind of, bless her heart. So how did I start believing? At that early age, going to church with her, I would look at the graves, and at a ridiculously early age, I'm talking about 5 or 6, I would look at the graves and go, is somebody in there staring back up? Are they still conscious? And I remember questioning, how can we die and not think? This didn't make any sense. And I do remember doing this at a very early stage. And I carried on trying to work my way through. So why that? Do we just stop? No, we can't. And then the later development was when I heard about this thing called reincarnation. I thought, oh, that's what must happen. Well, yes, that makes perfect sense. To me, that was perfectly logical. And it wasn't being taught in my church services, but, you know, that's okay. But I certainly began to believe in it by myself without reading the books. I hadn't read any books at that stage. You know, it was just something I just drew a conclusion towards. I just had it in me, and it just grew very slowly, very gradually, to the point when I needed to be out there doing it. And I absolutely believe in my spirit guides. And so I know when the time is right, they opened me up, if you like, to allow me to hear, to allow me to see, to allow me to know, and therefore to train with the right people, to be able to give that gift from God, from the divine, whatever label, to others when they come looking for it.
Wow. Oh wow, that's beautiful. And you said, you mentioned before that coming across the book by Michael Bentine was kind of like almost like your guides helping you
Oh, yeah.
journey.
The, the big thing they helped me with was when I'd read, he's written more than one book, by the way. There are several. There's Doors of the Mind, The Doors, Mark Summer, there's several of them. When I had read these and they'd made a difference, he had recommended, there was another healer called Betty Shine, he recommended highly, and I read her book. That was a wonderful self-healing book. And her book's called Mind to Mind. That's well worth reading. It's an old book. I hope it's still in print, because it was a very easy to read self-healing book. And from there you read and read and read. And I remember saying to my guides, once I'd really got onto my path, I was trained up in various forms of healing, oh, I would love to meet this man. I really would. He has made a difference, a big difference to me. I thought, well, probably won't meet him. Blow me down, I did. We both had a hospital appointment. I can't even remember what mine was for, but it's just a routine thing. And he was sitting opposite me, waiting to see his doctor. I can't believe it. So I know. I just looked up. I thought, oh, I cannot resist this, So I said, "Excuse me, Mr. Bentine." I was very polite. I was quite young. I was probably, I was in my mid to late 30s at that stage. Late 30s. Anyway, and I said, I just want to say thank you for writing that book. He said, well, which book? I said, well, particularly Doors of the Mind. And there were other people sitting there, so I sort of looked at him meaningfully, sort of wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about, Mr. Bentine, don't you? He said, oh, lovely, wonderful, good, jolly good. We had a long chat, and then we both went off to our appointments, and then we met again in the car park. And I just stood and talked to him for another 20 minutes, and it was the best 20 minutes of my life. The stuff this man came out with. And then we thought we'd better stop talking, because we were blocking the way for other people to leave the car park. And it was one of those momentous times I will never forget. And 6 months later, this beautiful man died. So I know that was a gift for me. It was my private little gift, and I will treasure that. I really will treasure that all my life. It was a really big turning point.
Wow, that's so beautiful. And it's true, you always do remember the very first teachers that you came across who kind of gave you that hope that, there's so much more and you can improve your life by, in such an amazing way. Yeah, I definitely always remember my first teachers who kind of just introduced me to this whole path. So yeah, I know what you mean. It's kind of like meeting a rock star or something. It's like your biggest, I'm your biggest fan.
I've had other wonderful teachers. I had a wonderful crystal healing teacher called Stephanie Collins, as she was then. She got married and became Stephanie Harrison. And she taught me how to be a good teacher, a very good teacher. She was superb, very professional, very grounded, but wise. And I've had other wonderful teachers as well, and more recently, of course, you and I have met through doing soul rescue healing, and we have learnt from Terry and Natalia O'Sullivan. So for us, that for me, doing soul rescue, because you were asking me about this earlier, the wonderful thing for me with soul rescue is that it allows me to use all the skills and training that I have had. I am allowed to use to do crystal healing and sound healing as well as the spiritual healing. I can use my psychic senses. I am allowed to discuss that with my client if that's appropriate, and for them to co-work with me in clearing whatever's stuck. Because I was talking to you earlier about it being a deep form of spiritual healing, but it's not just about rescuing your soul in this life. It's about past lives you've had. It's about ancestral links. You know, you may have an ancestor who's overshadowing, and it's gone down the generations. Yeah. So that sometimes needs to be cleared as well. It's a very big subject. It's absolutely fascinating. And then we have the ghost busting side, which is
so exciting. And I think this is for everyone.
We've had a lot of fun. It sounds crazy because most people would be really scared. Yeah. But I would just want to say it really isn't like what you see on television. I mean, some of that is a little bit Hollywood, shall we say. Exactly. And my team, Spiritus Exit, we certainly, and those of us who know each other through Soul Rescue, we don't behave like that. We show a spirit great respect, but we do try to heal. Some of the programs you see don't do the healing, they just stir up trouble, to be blunt. I'm sorry, but I don't like that.
The ghost-busting sort of US entertainment programs.
Yeah, you know, it's not just in the US. And I feel quite strongly about that, as you probably now have gathered. So our work is also to help souls, whatever level they're at, you know, whether they're angry, nasty, or whether they're sweet and gentle, to show them there's a way of going home, as we call it. You don't have to stay hanging around, or worse, tormenting people just because you're angry, or just because where our different domains are interlinking with each other and interfering. Yeah. So we aim to bridge that gap, to bridge these realms, and broker peace, as I always say, broker the peace between us, so they can live in their realm comfortably, we live in our realm comfortably. Or if it's souls who are stuck and would like to go home to their loved ones in spirit, we will help them to do that as well. It's a huge subject, but so fascinating. And once you're used to it, it's a joy, because to rescue, you know, people will phone me usually because they're desperate. Let's face it, not many people phone me just to keep their home feeling good. Yeah. It's because they're driven to it. And the pleasure of being able to sort that out in the day you go there. And for them to ring you up and say, oh, I can't believe the difference. And actually, it's not just our house is at peace now, or the business is now taken off again. It's the fact that everything else seems to have a knock-on effect. The rest of the family have calmed down. The run of bad luck has calmed down. You know, it's just so many other aspects that it can help. So I see healing as developing along these lines in the future. I don't think we're going to just be simple healers anymore. I think we're going to get more and more complicated in what we are trained in, but that's because we are serving a purpose. Because I think the problems are more complicated these days, but also because people are much more open to knowing what to ask for. And to trusting as they experience this, that there is a way out of this. We don't have to have the chaotic conditions that some homes are living in, or businesses. Exactly.
Yeah, and it's totally, and it's such a shame that, you know, sometimes people don't actually realize what is actually affecting them, and that what's affecting them is not physical, it's actually something spiritual. So unless you kind of look at the spiritual side of it, then you just continue to have those problems in, you know, banging your head against the wall thinking, what's going wrong with my home, when in reality it's something that's energetic.
But it can be interfered with energies. So there are other things we will look at as soul rescue healers. You know, we will look, is there a lot of electricity in and out of this home? Is there a lot of water? Do we know if there's any underground streams of water underneath? We will also dowse on a map beforehand, and again when we're there, maybe depending on what our skills are, to see what energy lines or ley lines. When I say ley, I actually mean energy lines, not the ley lines that develop because people have walked the same path for hundreds of years, slightly different. But we'll see if there are any energy lines running through someone's property that is distorted, blocked. And all these things can attract psychic interference. And sometimes if you have a very strong energy line running through your property, it acts like a psychic highway, and you get ghosts, for want of a better word, and other spirit beings, elemental beings, getting caught up on these highways, and they travel through. And when you get a property like that, I'm afraid you're very little you can do. You know, it'll always be there. It's not for us to try and move it. We just cannot go that far. But you can calm it down, and you can change certain aspects of it, just so that that home that person is living in, or the premises of their business, which is where it is placed over, everything calms down and doesn't interfere with their electrical appliances, doesn't interfere with the temperament of the people there. You know, when people say, oh, everyone's in a bad mood, or everyone keeps getting ill, other things can interfere with the energies. And it could be quite practical, like water. Not a lot you can do about that if you've got an underground stream of water. But you can give them ideas of how to cope with that. Or if they're really not coping, we will, if it really is necessary, we will advise they move. Because not everyone is sensitive to this. And that's the other thing to remember.
Yeah.
You know, some people can live with it, and that's fine.
Tell me a bit about that, because like you said, not everyone is sensitive, but you know, the sensitive people, they get very affected by it. And you know, sleep disturbance, like illness, like you said, so it's quite so do you think like what can people kind of look for if they were to kind of try to see if they live in a place that's has a quite good energy or not? Are these kind of the main things that they should look for? Obviously there might be other causes as to why they might be feeling tired or ill or anything like that with everything, but
that sort of thing you're not going to really know until you've actually lived somewhere. But I do a service for people who are house hunting, whether it's to rent or to buy, and I will do a quick snapshot of an exploration by looking online at the property details through the estate agent details online, which is dead easy to do. They have floor plans these days, they've got the photographs, you know, 10 photographs at least, and I then can look on Google Street Map and have a look on the outside of that property, look at what's surrounding that property, and I can do that in about 20 minutes to half an hour. And I will tune in as well using my psychic senses, and I'll just get a feel, is this place worth visiting? And that can save people a lot of time, particularly if they're moving to another area. And so people employ me to do that. And if I don't like somewhere, but that's in accordance to that person who's contacted me. It may not be right for everybody, but it's just that person's energy is not going to work with that place energy. That combination is going to be a bad one for them. Yeah, exactly.
That's so handy to have, you know, just like
useful. Yes. You see, you think of the amount of money you spend on a house or on your rental, and say it's a rental, you're stuck with at least 6 months of a contract, of a lease, and then you're really stuffed. So, you know, for that relatively small cost, it's just so useful for them. But in answer to your question properly, is if you can't go and have that kind of service from somebody, then I would say use your own senses. You have them. You might be wondering whether you have them. We all say, well, I don't think so. Sometimes I know who's on the phone, you know, before I pick the phone up, all that kind of stuff. We have that. So I think most people know when they even drive past a house, if they want to go inside and visit it. Most people do drive past before they visit when they're house hunting. You get a feel, don't you? You think, well, I like the house, but I don't like the area. Well, you just get a feel. So follow that gut reaction, or that psychic reaction. Use your whole system to do that. That usually is a really good starting point. When you actually go inside that building, use those senses again. Be aware of that. But if you open yourself up psychically, which you're going to do, whether you're a practicing psychic or not, you will open your aura up. You must be aware that you could then open yourself up to connecting with energy that may not be right for you to be in connection with. So it's good to try and give yourself a bit of a clearing afterwards. Now, if you're not trained, I can't expect you to know all the special ways that, you know, people like you and I know how to clear our energies. But a simple thing to do is to go and stand on the grass. Go and stand in the sun. or even in the rain actually, and just ask the earth energies to just filter out and get rid of all that, those shadows that you might have taken on from that property, and ask them to leave. And there's a simple phrase a lot of people use to say, I do not give permission for this to stay. It is all about permission. Another lovely thing is to imagine light filtering down through your aura and washing away those shadows. And then grounding, imagining you're like a tree. Get yourself properly aligned in your body. Good yoga practice, that. To put your hands in the prayer position is a good way of doing that too, very simple. And then imagine your energies going down from your head down into your feet, into the ground, a bit like being a tree, growing roots. And then just stretch, rub your hands, move on, have a drink of water, and you should feel an awful lot better. That's a very simple way of doing it.
Wow, thank you for that. I'm sure the listeners will use all of these. They really, I love that they're so practical and they're so easy and simple to follow. So you can just literally take, it takes like 2-3 minutes to do one of those. So
exactly. I mean, if you're practicing healer, you're going to do something a lot more complicated because you're in touch with people all the time. You're clearing negativity out of them. So you've really got to watch your own health. Many years ago, healers used to have a lot of ill health. And I was told that there was a very high percentage in healers for heart disease and cancers because of this enormous energy we have, because obviously we're channeling energy from the divine, but we've got this big energy field ourselves. A healer type, when they walk into the room, they have a presence about them, even if they're not actually practicing as a healer. So we do need to be aware of that. And being a big presence of energy means that we act like a sponge. So a lot of people say, yeah, I'm just like that. I'm like a sponge. I pick up everyone's emotions. I pick up all their negativity, and I'm a complete heap at the end of it, but I don't know what to do about it. And I've had that so often. I've had that from people training in reflexology and aromatherapy. They're not necessarily taught the energetics. I wish they were, but I know they still are not. Many are not. And they're now going into the field of therapy and giving therapy, but they're absorbing the stuff they're taking, helping to remove from people. They don't realize that they need to look after their energy field as well. Just because they're not healers officially, they are really. They need to be aware of that energetic side, that mind, body, spirit, and emotion. And it's a certain irony when you're training in complementary medicine, it's holistic, that quite a few of the trainings don't include healing of the spirit. It's a bit dotty, actually, I think. And I'd like to see that change, as we go into the 21st century, so that therapists are mindful of that. As I say, they don't have to practice as a healer, but they need to be aware that they have a duty, I think, to their clients. So that when you see your next client, especially in a clinic situation, you're back to back, you might be containing stuff you've just taken off the previous client. And then you have client number 2. Guess what? You're swimming in it together.
Yeah, definitely. I've also seen quite a few practitioners sort of they take those 10 minutes in between clients to clear themselves from the previous.
It's great.
And you don't want to go to someone who has all the energy from their previous client, because then that means they won't, they're not really going to deliver their best healing, I guess, in a way. So
it's a bit like, say you're going, you're going to the theatre, all right? And you're going to have a small seat, if you like, to sit in, and it's quite cramped, but actually you've brought all your shopping with you. Where are you going to put your shopping? It's cluttered, it's in the way. How can you really enjoy watching the play at the theatre or the concert of music if you've got all your shopping around you? You've got to declutter. And you've got to sit in comfort in a clean space. Then you can focus on the concert or on the theatre production. In other words, you can focus on your client because you're clean again. And you can do it very quickly. And then, of course, do a proper cleaning or clearing at the end of your day's work.
Yeah, which I know you're very good at. You do like an internal, external cleanse there, which is so clean. I've noticed it myself. It makes such a huge difference, and I have to say I'm not very good at keeping my sort of energy clearing every day, but when I do feel the difference, and it's kind of like,
I'm naughty as well. I'm still a human being.
Yeah, we face our troubles every day. Yeah.
Well, I know it when I've left it, you know, if I've gone a few days without meditating, my goodness me, I'll start to get a bit jittery, a bit strange. I'm thinking, ooh, I might have gone into a supermarket or public places or on a train, and I'm thinking, what's wrong with me? Of course I know what's wrong with me. Jane, come on, wake up. Stupid. You know what you haven't done lately? No, rap.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, yeah. No, that's such a key thing. But I just want to quickly go back to the soul rescue work and working on lands and properties, and with people as well, with spirits. What's been one of the most shocking thing that you found working with spirits? You know, people who have passed over and kind of get stuck. And because for me, well, for one, I was shocked to find out that people even do get stuck, and you know, there is an afterlife, and people get stuck, and some of them don't even realize that they're actually dead. I think that's been the biggest shock.
Very tactful.
Yeah.
Always. I always assume they don't know until I find out they do know. Because if you got, I've had a lot of elderly people stuck in houses, and they're very frustrated because no one's talking to them. They don't understand. They might have had a dementia problem as well, so they can be a little bit confused still because they haven't sort of understood what's going on. So you have to be very tactful. Also, if you get spirits who've been there a long time, the longer they are in spirit, I'm talking about hundreds of years, the more confused isn't quite the right word. It's more like being in limbo. The more dazed, I think is probably a better word, state they're in. They just don't know what the heck's going on, and they've learned to just accept the state they're in. But it's an eternal state of nothingness. It's not very nice. But you said your original question was, what's the worst thing? I think you said something like that.
What's the most shocking thing, that you've found?
Don't know. I'd have to think about that one.
Has it made you feel really sad for them and stuff? Because
yes, I can give you the saddest one I've ever had, and it was my very first experience of soul rescue before I started the formal training, and before I had been invited to go in and do healing of people's homes, because I'd been doing that for years before the formal training. The first experience I had was going to one of these war graves in northern France. And my husband was keen to see one of these. He hadn't been to one before, and we had 2 young children. And so we went in, and the rows and rows and rows of pure white gravestones. There's an extraordinary atmosphere when you go to these places. They calm you down, and you feel huge respect for these hundreds and hundreds of people who've lost their lives defending the realms, different countries. So they'd wandered off, and I was on my own, and I suddenly sort of was aware, because I was already psychically open. I suddenly had a guide saying to me, "Oh, can you take this gentleman across?" And I think it was an airman, if I recall. And I said, "Oh, certainly." And I was aware of this airman standing near me. And so I was then guided to open up this vortex of light. And I was aware of an angelic being at the top of this. I describe it as at the top. It's difficult. It's like another dimension, but I'll just say it figuratively speaking. And as a healer, you align with the light. It's one of the key things you do with the divine light to protect yourself and to protect your client. But this was to protect the rescue of this gentleman. So we created, guides, the angelic, created this beautiful, I can't call it a tunnel of light because it was upright in my eyes, but it was like the tunnel of light that people see when they have a near-death experience, but it's upright. Some people call it Jacob's ladder as well. That's another description. You'll see that in the Bible, of a shaft of light. I invited him to come in, and I explained that he'd be taken across into the world of spirit, and he can go home, he can meet his loved ones. And he thanked me, and off he went. Then all these others started to follow. And I mean hundreds. I was so taken aback. And I was aware of loads and loads and loads of souls going up into this light. And they were saying to me, "Oh, thank you. And come on, you know." And so it went on. And of course I started to cry because it was just, I I was just aghast at this experience. How old was I? I was going to be around the time I met Michael Benton, I think my late 30s, I think, perhaps early 40s at that stage, yes. I was just overwhelmed by their gratitude, and I was totally in the moment. I have no idea what my family were doing. I haven't a clue what they were doing.
I forgot about them. I'm going to do my work here.
I felt I'd been there for about 15 minutes. It just seemed a long time. And finally it seemed to stop. And then I was told, thank you, and close. Oh, yeah. Wow. What happened there? And that was a dramatic beginning to soul rescue work for me. Anyway, I mopped my eyes, and it all seemed to calm down. And then the sort of vision of the graveyard reappeared. And I thought, oh, where are my family gone? And they wandered off. They hadn't even noticed. So I chased over to find them, and I eventually found them. They hadn't even noticed I had been away. So I don't know whether there was a time lapse, whether it was just in 2 minutes, or whether it was much longer. That it felt like it was a lot longer. But I just stood near them. They didn't say anything. They didn't say, "Oh, where have you been?" Or it was as if.
I just saved a couple of thousand people, but never mind.
I have no idea. I have no idea. But I just remember the thank you, and the emotional impact it had on me. Goodness knows how they felt. Because they were, and I've heard this again. This goes back to the Michael Benteen autobiographies he writes. He had this when he was with the RAF, British Intelligence, and when he was at base, he would know when people had died or were about to go off and not survive their flights and so on. Bomber command. He was involved with all of that on the ground,
So was he doing actual spiritual rescue work as well, or was he?
Yes, he was. Because I think all people who are involved in this do know about rescue work. Not everyone likes doing it by themselves. A lot of people prefer to in groups. But as you see, I've always done it by myself. And then I actually read Terry and Natalia Sullivan's book, Soul Rescue, and I just found that in a bookshop one day. I thought, oh, this looks like it's all about what I do. It's the only book I could find at the time. I'll have that. And so it was kind of a Bible for a while. And then one day I met a friend who was just starting their course. 2 weeks later, I was starting their course, and that was 10 years ago now. So now I'm formally a soul rescue healer, and I've progressed in that time, and I'm very lucky. I've been awarded the advanced certificate, but I love it with a passion. So it's nice to have had that reward, but also I feel very comfortable and confident in what I'm doing.
Because you're one of the few that has an advanced certificate from the soul rescue course. But
I am at the moment, yes,
which is a really difficult one to get.
It's simply because the training is long, and they feel very strongly that people shouldn't just gain mastership. It's very easy. You can become, in some circumstances, you can become a Reiki master in 3 weekends. I'm by no means saying all Reiki training is like that anymore, but there has been occasion in the past where it's been very quick. Become a master. To become masterful in anything can take lifetimes. It's something that many of us feel a sort of knee-jerk reaction against, but because it's a continuous process of learning. But
it's a huge responsibility.
They take certification quite seriously. You can become a foundation healer, you can become an intermediate healer, and if you really embrace doing this kind of work and can prove you know what you're doing, you can communicate with all levels of spirit. You can clear, you're not daunted by the fact you can clear ancestral problems, past life problems, present day problems, etc., and deal with a house and be able to teach it as well. Then you'll get your advanced certificate. You'll master it to that level. I'm by no means thinking, oh goody, that's it, I've got my driving license,
I'm done.
It's just totally stupid to have that attitude, because actually it's such a compelling subject. If you have an inquiring mind, there's so much more to learn, so many more avenues to explore that could enhance what I'm doing, not just the training I've had, but other stuff that I could make more of, and really help people in the future.
Totally, yeah. No, yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it is an ever evolving subject, because there's always something new that comes up and you don't know about. I mean, it's such a vast, just this, honestly, there's no, it's like an endless sort of journey, you know, into this spiritual world. It's such a huge topic, and I just find it fascinating. But yeah, the reason I asked you this was about, you know, what you found the most shocking, was because for me, I went from being a complete non-believer. I didn't believe in anything to do with like spiritual stuff, ghosts, or at least what we call ghosts and things like that. And then to go from that to seeing what actually happens in the afterlife, and how people, you know, can get stuck, and some of them don't even realize it. And it made me, initially I felt kind of scared, because it's ghosts, you know, you're dealing with spirits, and we have this idea of like, you know, they're so scary, and but then you actually realize you feel so sad for them, and for many of you, because they are stuck and they don't have anyone to speak to. And I think for me that was one of the most revelatory things that I found in
if you called it shocking, I'd call that the most shocking thing I ever found. Was that's awful, what a terrible state to be in. And then you learn to have compassion when you're doing spirit release, which is the generic term for it, rather than have fear. Forget the fear. If you're fearful, you're not going to do the job properly. You know, you need to realize these are beings that have been on planet Earth, and they've had a life, and they don't know what's happened. Now, that could be because they've not had a religious background. I personally don't think that's the main reason why people get stuck. I think that other things hold us to this earth, and we don't want to move on, or we're scared, or we've been a really bad person and we're just too scared to meet our maker because we know we've gone too far. It's a myriad, there's all sorts of possible reasons, and I think people still debated on it. I've even met leading people in the psychic world who don't believe there's anything like an earthbound. And I'm shocked by that because of my own experience and my interaction with spirits who are, as you say, they're upset. And sometimes they'll start throwing things around the room, or they do poltergeist stuff, not because you've got a disturbed teenager in the house, but because there is a ghost there. I use that word quite lightly, I'll explain why in a minute, who is upset because no one's listening to them. And yet they can see your light as a human, because you've got a lovely light, but they're trying to attract your attention by picking something up off the wall or whatever it is, and saying, will you listen to me, help, you know. And once you realize that, it's actually not as scary, and you think, God, you poor thing. And then you go in and you listen to them, and you say, I'm here, I can hear you, I can sometimes see you. Tell me what your story is, what would you like to do about it, let's do this together, and no, you don't have to stay here. Now, just quickly slipping back to this word ghost. Again, some people don't like the word ghost as a generic term. They prefer the word spirit. Sometimes people will say, well, a ghost is actually an imprint, a spiritual imprint. It doesn't have a consciousness. So when Anne Boleyn walks at Hatfield House, I think that's the story on Midsummer's Night or something, that'll be an imprint. That's not her, that's not Anne Boleyn. That's the imprint of her doing it repeatedly. So it's like a stone tape recording. That's called the stone tape theory. And something triggers it around that time in Midsummer for someone who's psychically capable of seeing it. So there is this interlinking of possibilities. The spirit usually will have a consciousness in which they can converse with you if they wish. Don't always. Some can be quite belligerent. Some, refuse to talk to you. If they're of the elemental kingdom, that's quite common because they think, mere human. I will sometimes say, I want you to look beyond what I look like. Blue-eyed blonde. Just look beyond that. I want you to look at my spirit. I want you to see that I too am a spirit, and I'm here to do a job. And if I can help you, I will try. So, and it's usually that stops them because they stop looking at the physical side of me, and they look at whatever light I have and spiritual body. And I'd say 100% of the time they stop and go, oh, okay. And then they start to converse. and we start getting the dialogue going, and then we work out, what are you doing there? Why are you attached to that person, or why are you attached to that building? Why are you creating havoc? What right have you got to do that? Have you got a problem? Can we resolve that for you? It's an intermediary thing, you know. It's a sort of, it's like being not a troubleshoot, which is a troubleshooting thing, but you're a diplomat going in to try and broker peace.
Yeah,
as I said
you
earlier.
have to have very good counseling skills, actually, because you're conversing with another being, whether human or element. Actually, can you explain for anyone who doesn't know what elemental means exactly? Because I'm not sure if
Of course, loosely speaking, it's the fairy kingdom. But there are many, many layers to the fairy kingdom. You know, yes, you have the fairies themselves. You have divas that are the bridge between the fairy kingdom and the angelic. You have goblins and nymphs and salamanders. And then we go down to we get a bit more naughty. The goblins can be a bit naughty. But when you get the fun-loving ones like the pixies and so on. But then as we go further down, we go to what we generally call the dark force entities. Now, there are lots of types of that. I talked about people being dark earlier, like a prison officer might be dark because he needs to be firm. When I say dark force entity, I mean someone who doesn't abide by the rules at all. They're more like the bad-tempered prisoners who really don't give a monkey's. You know, they are just their law unto themselves. They have no respect for law with a capital L, spiritual law, anyone's law but their own. And really, you can't negotiate. The lower down that level they are on that evil side, the less likely you're going to have any dialogue with them whatsoever. And you have to be experienced enough to recognize that. And so as a healer, and I work with spirit guides, I'm aware of certain spirit guides I can call upon to deal with that dark force entity on my behalf, to intercede. So I would say, strictly speaking, it's not me that actually does that in the end. I'm not going to give out any particular names, but in that particular guide I will call upon will be the one who'll be the prison officer or the police officer, if you like.
He's the one that deals with them.
Yeah, exactly. I will send him in or her to deal with that particular entity that needs dealing with, because it's a very different very different level of being. So that's the elemental kingdom, and it's to do with the earth. They're connected to the earth. So they say that we are all fundamentally elemental. We all began as elementals. We were those spirit beings before we took on physical body and the weight of being physical, which is an interesting concept. When the earth began.
Wow, that's so fascinating. And it just shows how vast this whole topic is and how deep it can go with understanding it.
See, in modern humans, you sometimes meet someone that, oh, they're a fairy, or they used to be a fairy. They've got a very light, sort of soft thing, or angelic. They have a more powerful presence about them with their angelic origins. And then you get the ones who are on the darker side, and they'll glare at you. Have attitude.
The ones you don't really want to get near to is kind of like, okay, I will keep my distance.
I mean, so, you know, light attracts. You know, we attract the dark. The sense of opposites can attract, but they will have their own rules, even if they're in human form. So, and their origins would have been on the dark side of the elemental kingdom, but they've managed to come to a point where they can incarnate as a human. But the whole point of being on this earth, once we do become human, is to learn how to overcome the dark side in the bad sense. I know it's very confusing, this word dark, because it can mean both in our English language anyway. But to overcome bad things that happen with integrity, with honesty, and not letting it take over and rule us, so we become bad as well. Because guess what? We have to come back in the next life and start that particular lesson all over again. And if anyone doesn't believe that, you wait. Because we have
we'll come to you.
Yeah, and it will be in my hands. The thing is, it's in your hands, your own hands, your own integrity, the way you conduct yourself. It's your choice.
Yeah, and I think that's such a key point to remember with anyone who wants to get into sort of spiritual work or any type of energy healing, is to always know your integrity and to always stay within your center and just know what is you. And yeah, because I guess it's so easy to kind of, I guess, get a big ego because maybe you're doing this and that, and you think now you can kind of do anything and you can heal anyone. And
It's very human. It's very human. There's nothing wrong with having ego. We need it, or else we'd just be blobs of jelly. We need an ego. We need an ego to have the guts to apply for a job. We need an ego to have the guts to teach people, or to dare to ask somebody out for a date, for instance. All the different bits of life. We need to have that personal power within us to move ourselves forward. It's how we use our personal power, how we use that ego, whether it becomes an overbearing ego that dominates and barges in like a bull in a china shop, or actually has the wisdom to say, okay, I've got power, so I must use it wisely and be careful I don't overpower other people, but also hopefully they can benefit from what how far I've come. Yeah, and we can all think of examples where that can go very badly wrong.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's quite a few out there. I wanted to quickly ask you about sort of, do you think it's in terms of sort of grief? And because for me, one of the huge topics that I've been very interested in terms of learning about life after death, is to help people who are grieving and who are, who've had family, like a loved one pass away. And then typically, people who are not aware of this side, they don't really believe in anything to do with that. And I found personally, from my own journey in losing someone from my own family, and just learning that they still exist, continue to exist, their consciousness exists. I mean, that's been a huge just help for me, and just knowing that they still are there in a way, not physically, but spiritually, I can still connect with them. So, how do you see this kind of, do you think it's helpful for people to at least have some sort of an awareness of this? And do you think, have you seen in your personal life that it really helps people in a way?
Oh, all the time. I think if you lose someone you love dearly and it's abrupt, or even if it's slow because they've been very ill, that sense of complete loss, of having nothing of them, is devastating. And we all have that at the very beginning when we first lose someone, whether we're spiritually aware or not. It is still devastating. But it is one of the big initiations we have to go through as human beings here in this physical world, of having to lose someone dear to us and to cope without that physicality. Because we've grown up in a physical world. Everything is physical. And so to suddenly have that removed, if it's your loved one that you're married to, you don't have that person beside you. That physicality is gone. You don't hear their voice. You don't smell their presence. Now, if you are able to open up your psychic senses and they are able to visit you, because usually at some point they are, not necessarily straight away. People expect it to happen straight away. If they've gone through a lot of illness or they've gone through a big shock, it's going to take a little while for them to adjust in the world of spirit before they can come back and visit. Then you need to give them time. You need time also to get used to that sense of bereavement. It is an initiation. It's not a nice one, but it's all part of being human. It's not fun. But to have the belief that maybe one day you're going to get that connection, that gives you hope. If we have hope removed, it's a killer, literally a killer. And people can become very ill if they don't feel there's anything out there. There are atheists out there who don't believe that there's anything out there, but they're quite happy with their lives. They find a way of finding that happiness in other ways. So I'm not here to preach and say you must do this, but I think we find our own ways, and I think that's all part. I also believe that people sometimes are totally anti-spirituality because they've been injured in past life, and they've decided, okay, in this life, I'm having nothing more to do with it. I'm going to have a life off, not a day off, a life off, and not connect because I need a break from all of that. But sometimes I will look in their eyes and think, you know an awful lot more in there. You're just not connecting to it. But I will respect that. It's not for me to be the preacher and to say, you really should open yourself up. It's just,
Yeah.
it's not how it works. We have a very individual path. And I think I said this earlier in this interview, if you're ready for it, then you will open your own door in your own time.
No, totally. Yeah. It just shocks me sometimes because I work, in a place that's sort of teaches a lot of spiritual courses, and so many times I've had people kind of ring up and say, they've never attended any courses or anything to do with that, but they've had a loved one pass away, and they didn't know who else to call. Basically, they're a non-believer. They've never dealt with anything to do with psychics or mediums or anything to do with that, but they had no other choice, kind of thing. So they called, and they literally kind of almost sometimes crying on the phone, and they're kind of like, I don't know what to do, I don't know who to turn to. And you just think, God, no matter how much you don't believe in it, when the universe pushes you into a corner and you have no other choice, you kind of just have to embrace the unknown.
It's a human need, I think, to have that spiritual side. We have these 4 parts to our being, and the part of that is that connection with spirit, not just for ourselves, but with another spirit that we have lost. And I think if you can open yourself to it, the comfort you will get is enormous. It really is enormous. If you're thinking of going to see a medium to find out if your loved one is safe and is fine, then you must go through to someone who has been properly recommended, or to a major organization in this country. There are a few where they are trusted, properly trained and trusted. If you just go to any name you've plucked out of the internet, for heaven's sakes, make sure you found out if they're any good. Because they could give you a load of rubbish, I'm very sorry to say, but they could also mislead you, or you go away disappointed because either that loved one wasn't ready to come and talk to you, or what you were given just didn't add up anyway, you couldn't relate to it, and that will damage you further if you're going through bereavement. There is that risk. But there are some very well-trained people out there, and there are some very good people out there who sincerely wish to help those who are bereaved. And if that does give you comfort, that's great. I would just like to say that, if you're deeply religious, you should be able to get that comfort from your priest, whoever your minister is, whatever religion you follow. And therefore, it doesn't have to be a medium. You can go to your priest and ask to understand that God has taken that soul, and in the nicest sense, and to look after it, and your loved one will be all right. But for those of us who want a bit more, who want to be able to communicate and get that proof, not just belief, but proof, then a well-trained medium is a good way forward. But we've all got it inside ourselves, a bit like we were talking about the sensitivity in a house, and whether we like the house or not to buy it. If you think your loved one is standing near you as you're mixing some soup in the kitchen, that loved one probably is. It might be your imagination, but does it matter if it's given you comfort? I don't mind if someone is making it up just to give themselves comfort at the end of the day. But usually you'll get more than that. You'll get a lot more proof. You'll begin to feel that presence more. You'll hear the voice in your head, and not in a weirdy way, but just a comforting, sweet way. Think, oh, I got it the other day. I was thinking, what year did Michael Bentine die? I was just thinking about it before our interview. And I got the 1996. I thought, oh, okay. Wow. I thought, I'll just Google that. Oh, yes, 1996. Oh, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
I can't believe it was Michael. It'd be lovely to think it was. But somebody did know and furnished me with that info. And as an ordinary person, you can get that. Actually, you've left. I can't find whatever your favourite pen, and I can't find it. Where is it? And your loved one or someone who's connected with your loved one will say, it's in that drawer. And I look there. Go and look again. Oh yes. So you get little bits of proof. And I think, how can I doubt this? And of course, I've been in my work in the field, but formally practicing for 30 years. And I grew up with psychic stuff happening anyway. So I was kind of destined, I think, to end up doing it.
More than enough proof by now, Well, tell me about, because you do a lot of things, and soul rescue is just one part, and the energy healing. Tell me about the Pendragon group. What is it, and what do you do there?
The Pendragon group is a group I started probably about 25 years ago. I was teaching a course called Self-Healing and Meditation. It was a 6-week course on healing your mind, your body, your spirits, and the emotion, the holistic thing. And so each week we'd focus on that. Then we'd bring it all together in week 5, and then we'd look at healing your home in week 6. This was long before I started Soul Rescue. It was already being laid down by the guidance I was getting, I reckon. And that was very successful. I ran it, I think, 3 times a year, maybe 4 times a year. And that was a really good, it sort of taught me a great deal, teaching others, because they say your pupils teach you, and I got that. And from that, people said, oh, I don't want it to end after those 6 weeks. What happens? I thought, I don't know, I haven't thought about it. And that's how the Pendragon group evolved. I thought, okay, let's have a follow-on. And I called it Pendragon because I am fundamentally Welsh in my bloodlines, and that's obviously a very Welsh name. And I researched it, and the old meaning of pen and dragon, that's more of an international thing, was the pen and the dragon were both kings. A Pendragon was king of kings. So I thought, okay, the best of the best, if you like.
Yeah.
And also, dragon energy is in the etheric sense, responsible for the formation of crystals in the earth. And as a crystal healer, I related to that as well. So I thought, yeah, I like that. That works for me. And it's all quite grounded. I like the idea of dragons. I've always been a fan of dragons. I think of them as the sort of angelic of the earth. They're kind of, in a sense, working for the great mother of the earth, the earth goddess.
Oh yeah.
And so you need something a bit more earthly, more elementally connected to govern, rather than our beautiful angelic of the divine sources. So so that's how the name evolved, and it became a spiritual and psychic development group. And I've been running it ever since. I had a bit of a break when I was living in Dorset quite recently, but I've come back now to living in Surrey, and it's kicked off again. And some of my members are members from years back, have come back again.
Oh, that's amazing.
So it's an absolute pleasure to do this kind of work, and I've really been extremely lucky that I've had people coming to me who are wonderfully heart-centered. They are a beautiful crowd, and sometimes they turn up a little bit fidgety, irritable for their first visit, and you think, okay, what's going on there? And then they just mellow out. They just calm down. They blend into the group, and then they become just like the rest. It's lovely. But the point is, over the years, many have gone on to teach themselves or to become healers themselves. And that is fabulous, to think that something quite so simple as what we were doing does help people actually go on and do it for themselves and to help others. So it's a network gradually growing. And it's lovely.
That's amazing. And the fact that people are still coming back means, it's definitely I can imagine you're an amazing. I've worked with you before, so I can only imagine how good you are like teaching.
Some of them bring their children now. Their children have grown up and they're ready to come and have readings or healings. That's really lovely. And I'm seeing more and more the young opening up very early. Some of us opened up a lot later, but I was in my mid-20s to it was about 28, 29 when I started healing, and the youngsters are coming up in their mid-teens wanting to do this, which I do it gently with them. They don't come to the development class because it's too young. I want their auras a lot stronger. It's really important to remember that. There's some people bring in kids into these development groups. I personally don't think it's a good idea. I'd like to see their aura getting stronger. I'd like them to have a bit more life experience, so they get a bit tougher, and they can protect themselves better. I think it's my personal choice.
Yeah, but that's an important thing to definitely to mention. Yeah, I never really realized, but I guess so are you saying that your aura builds up with age, kind of with your life experiences? Yeah,
I think life experience helps. You do get tougher. I think also with life experience, it's a bit like your muscles get a bit tighter with age, you know.
Yeah.
The mesh that is your aura gets not tighter with age. That's not quite a good description, but you get the idea. It does age in a sense.
Yeah. Mm.
I think it gets contributed towards its strength as you have more and more life experiences. Your
Mm.
emotional body will toughen up. Your mental body will toughen up.
Yeah.
Your spirit body is your spirit body. That's come from your incarnate higher self.
Yeah.
You know, it's a bit that incarnates from your higher self, and that that might bring memories from past lives. It might bring memories from might have some ancestral connections there, but it's the emotional body and a mental body, and of course your etheric body, which is the mirror of your physical. That's going to have a lot of scars from your current life, and scar tissue in the physical body, putting my nursing hat on, toughens up the skin. So it's in a sense it's the same energetically, but it's because we're more experienced. But then we can use that energy better because it's stronger. Hopefully it is stronger.
No, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And tell me a bit about your aura clearing method that you do. I'm really interested in knowing that. What does it involve?
Yeah, it's a very boring title to call it the aura clearing method. You know, I've joked a few times saying I'll call it the Butterworth method if it's. But then I thought, well, I can't do that.
As long as it works, then it's fine. I think that's the main.
Back to aura clearing, because it says what it says on the tin.
Yeah.
We clear the aura, and it's one of the things we did a little bit actually in the soul rescue training. I was thrilled when we did that because oh gosh, I do this already. What I do is I take people on a journey from the top of their head down to their feet. And let's give a typical example. Someone comes to me, they've left their husband, it was very bad ending, very sadly, but they still feel that husband, they're still looking over their shoulders if he's still there. So this could happen to a man with a bad wife. I don't want to get the genders muddled, but just keep it simple. And this person may come along and she said, I know I've left him, I don't live with him anymore, but you know, he still presses my buttons, he still sends me nasty emails, he's still there. And so this is one reason why this method can be helpful. There's lots of reasons for using this method, but this is one. So we look for him, whoever he is, let's call him Bert. We look for Bert and we look to see if he's implanted anywhere in the aura all the way down to the feet. The client has his or her eyes closed and they're visualizing. So it's a visualization technique. They will often say to me, oh, I'm not very good at visualization. They jolly well are when I finish with them. It's amazing what they see. Because once you open yourself up psychically, which I help them do, they can see an awful lot. And they don't need to see much. It's just enough to see what we're dealing with. So we're looking for Bert. And, oh, he's in my head. Actually, he's filling my head or whatever. Oh, he's in my solar plexus, which is that ego center. So you're disempowered. Oh, I've got him down below. Well, if you had a sexual relationship with someone, you're going to see him. It's all controlling areas. And so then we go back to these various areas and we dialogue with that imprint of this man. And we'll say, Bert, what are you doing there? And then my client will repeat what she hears. And which is, oh, he doesn't want to leave. And I'll say, well, why don't you want to leave? Well, she needs me, meaning the client. And we have to explain, no, she doesn't need you anymore, actually. Sometimes they can be belligerent and say, I'm not going. So it depends. If they're happy to go and they realize the error of their ways, then we imagine this doorway of light and they go through and the door is closed. So that aspect of them, which is what I believe it is, energetically goes back to them. That's where it came from. It won't harm them. And it actually helps heal them. So Bert has a bit of healing himself. He has lost a bit of himself by implanting into the client, his wife, his ex-wife. And that can't be helping him either. So this does help him. So we return these bits. If there's anything in the client that's belligerent, doesn't want to go, I then will interfere. And I will use my healing techniques and I will stand up and go to the client who's been prepped that I'm going to do it. I don't just lunge at them. And I will physically remove that energy and send it away. So that clears them out.
Wow.
So that's fundamentally it. And we send light into those areas where it had been occupied, so that the client is very much engaged in the healing act. It's not just me doing it. They're sending light to those empty spaces. And if it's something quite nasty, we say, would you like to put something positive in there, something beautiful? They might say, yeah, I want to put a rose there, so my heart can grow again. That's a typical example. Right, what rose would you like to put in? Oh, my favourite rose is this. Right, plant the rose, water it. It sounds quite fanciful, but you're telling your brain and your mind what you really want to do. You're sending messages which are positive, and let's heal, let's move on. Let's move on from the past. We've done that. Don't need to keep repeating it. The end result is they will find that their, let's say Bert again, stops interfering. He realizes it's a waste of time. And their relationship can often actually improve as a result of them not being enmeshed together psychically, angry with each other for what went wrong. So it helps both parties.
Wow.
That's just one example. It can obviously vary a great deal.
Yeah, that's really
We
fascinating.
can do it with illness as well. If somebody's got an illness and they don't know why they're so ill. I had somebody very recently with a scar tissue problem internally, and they was causing them to have great difficulty with breathing. So we went in to see what on earth was going on there. Didn't see anybody or any entities, nothing interfering. What she saw was a load of rocks, hard rocks. So we said, right, well, then we need to smash those up then. So it could be something quite weird and ordinary, as opposed to a person. So sometimes we get their spirit guides to come and join, and they'll say, oh, actually, my mother's arrived. I said, that's lovely, or father, whatever. So we're going to smash these rocks up, clear it out. We've got a celestial skip, we'll chuck it out. It sounds crazy, but it works, this method. And they clear it up. They clear up the mess, put something better in there, and they say, oh, that feels better. I feel so much lighter. So there's two examples, one with illness, one with a bad relationship.
Wow. And it just makes you think, I mean, imagination is so important, such an important part of this work, isn't it? Because it is through the imagination that you're bringing these energies through, right? So, yeah.
It's difficult to know whether we call it the imagination or some sort of mental power, mental energy, because imagination to me always sounds like it's something made up. People say, oh, I'm an artist, I just use my imagination. But where are you getting that from?
Yeah.
Are you really just making it up, or are you actually sourcing something from another dimension that you're able to translate into the physical world? And that's my belief, is what we're actually doing.
Wow. So how can you tell when you're just imagining something or it's actually happening? What's the difference for you? Oh, I don't know. Is there a difference? Because, I guess sometimes, for example, with me, I always doubt myself. So sometimes when I feel like I'm speaking to my mom, for example.
Oh, I see the angle of taking. Right. Yeah. I mean, a good example is if you're channeling words from a spirit guide, and particularly if you're doing it for yourself, you often want to just hear what you want to hear. So you have to be discerning, and that's something you learn with spiritual and psychic development. Once you've done those sort of lessons and classes, you will learn to discern. You begin to get a feel of whether that's come from literally your imagination, something you've made up. That's how I view the imagination. What your mind wants to hear, what your brain wants to hear. You want to sort of pat yourself on the back. It's going to be all right. Or whether it's come from some sort of spiritual guidance of a higher nature. I should add, we do get spiritual guidance from a lower nature that likes to play around and trip you up. So you need to learn to be discerning with that. But I'm talking about people who are in the business, and that's why a good medium, a good clairvoyant is essential. Don't waste your money unless you're sure that person does know what they're doing, and is a pure source, is channeling from a pure source.
No, definitely. Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I mean, at least spend your money wisely on this. If you're spending it, then spend it somewhere good. It's worth it, because we pay money for doctors, we pay money for medicine, but
and not every doctor's going to give you what you want to hear. Not every plumber's going to do a good job on your pipes. It's the way it is. It's by experiment, and then you get to know someone you really like. Oh, I'll have that plumber back. I'll go back to that doctor. I'll go back to that clairvoyant because I trust them.
Yeah, totally. And let me just ask you about grounding, because I feel like that's such an important part of, you know, every person who's working with spirituality or with energy work, the ability to ground the work, as in physically, you know, be present, live as a human being. Because I've noticed, especially in the spiritual field, a lot of people tend to go a little too far in the spiritual stuff, and they don't really integrate anything into their kind of daily routine. And I know you do a lot of things that are kind of,
Choice. Yeah,
yeah,
it's a shame. You see them. I remember working at the Mind Body Spirit exhibition many years ago. I was helping somebody on a stand, and we'd see people floating past the stand going, "Oh, I just had some healing." I thought, yeah, planet Earth to whoever you are, let's just get you back down again,
yeah,
because you obviously didn't have any grounding given to you at the end.
yeah,
When you're floaty like that, your aura is out here, and if you're out here, you're going to pick up everything. And in a place like an exhibition, there's all sorts of scattered energies and crazy
yeah,
energies, and not so good energies. And you're opening yourself up to a psychic attack, to be a bit blunt.
yeah,
So, yes, grounding for me is extremely important. I know some people don't believe in it, actually, and I think that still is the case with some people. But some people say all you have to do is just get up and stretch and drink a glass of water. Fine, you know, if it works for them, maybe they're extremely grounded anyway.
yeah,
But I have found, because of my personal vibration, I really need to be very strict. My crystal healing teacher called me, "You are a space cadet, Jane. You've just got to realize that you're going to go flying off. And you've got
yeah,
to learn to be in control of that." So that was one of the big things I had to learn as I was developing those very, very early years. And of course, you know, it's been quite fun to sort of recognize all the other space cadets if they've come my way. So we can make a joke out of it, but
yeah,
realize the responsibility is we're here on Earth. We are here to be incarnate in the physical body, living a human life, and not just floating around the whole time. And there's nothing wrong if you want to dedicate yourself to the world of spirit. You know, if you might do it in a religious way and become a nun or a monk, but there's an awful lot wrong if you are living an ordinary human life and not contributing to it.
yeah,
I think you're wasting your time. That's why we're here. And in my personal life, I do other things that really ground me. And they're nothing to do with spirituality, but they bring a great deal of joy. And I'm a member of the county archaeological group, and
yeah,
I'm on the finds team. So I'm handling Roman stuff, tiles and
wow,
bits of pot and so on. And for me, that's just a joy. I love all that. There's an
yeah,
awful lot of Roman stuff here in Surrey, where I live, but there is all over the place. They've just discovered more Roman remains in Exeter, as if there couldn't be any more. There's loads more. I also am a member of Rock Choir, which I'd recommend to anyone. This is a national group.
wow,
We just go for a really good sing-along. It's such a pleasure, and the sort of people that are drawn there are there to relax and enjoy themselves. So,
that
you know,
sounds so
that's just my
exciting.
purposes.
It sounds such a like cool thing to be proud of. Oh yeah, I'm just part of this rock choir, and you know, you just, yeah,
Well, you know, I'm very impressed by their whole organization, which is why I'm mentioning it, because I think it's a good place to go for getting yourself out of yourself, you know,
yeah,
without
totally.
the pressure of socializing. If that's a little bit of a difficulty for you, you can meld
Mm,
into a choir. So any kind of choir is a good thing if you enjoy singing.
yeah,
You don't have to be good at it, you just need to enjoy it.
just
So that's
yeah.
just two examples.
No, totally. I find that so important to kind of just reconnect with the real world and with real people, and kind of step away from spirituality for a little bit, you know, and kind of be into that real. But I just want to quote a really amazing advice that you gave on your earlier, and I just want to read it out because I find it so important in terms of reconnecting with your heart and your head. And you just said, remember to think with your heart and feel with your head. Integrating spirituality is not just about meditating, believing in spirit guides, or following a well-worn doctrine. It is about purifying your own pathway in a way that is true to yourself. I just find that so beautiful. And do you want to just explain a little bit more why you think it's so important to connect the two?
I think because as humans, it's very easy to do everything with your head, particularly. We think. At school, we're taught to think and learn stuff for exams. Then we get our grades from our exams. Then we apply for a job. We're thinking. Or we may still be studying at university. It's all about the mind. Where do the emotions come in? And then we have our private lives where the emotions are allowed out for once. But the two get divorced, I think, as we grow up. And on a spiritual path, I think it's a really important aspect of developing ourselves as human beings is to integrate the head and the heart. And so you intertwine, so your heart starts to think and your head starts to feel. And if you can reach that point, your spirit can start to grow. And if it can start to grow, your progression as a spirit, because that's what it's really all about, not our progression as a human being, will just start to rocket. And you'll be a much more functional and efficient human being who can give to others in a much better way. But your spirit will gain. So when you die, in my belief system, you will go back up to your higher self. We're like an orange, and there's a segment that's come down to be Jane. That segment goes back up once my physical body has died and joins my higher self, the orange. And I bring back all those experiences to the orange, to my higher self, for the next segment to come down and incarnate as whatever. And that knowledge will then come back. So if I've learned to integrate my head and my heart, which would be a wonderful ultimate goal, I think that would be a great gift to my higher self. And ultimately then to the rest of the divine, because ultimately we are all interconnected. So we all help each other eventually. It's a concept that gets a bit mind-blowing after a while, but there's no reason why we can't start in little increments.
Yeah. No, I completely agree, totally. And you said it so beautifully. Yeah, you explained it really well. And I think it's definitely something everyone should, whether you're religious or spiritual, it doesn't matter. It's always so important to tap into your feelings, because otherwise we're just kind of like a robot, and it's not
but also don't let those feelings destroy you. And that's why being grounded is essential. Because if you enter into your emotional side without being grounded, you will spiral off. You'll become over emotional. A really good example, I think, was when Princess Diana died. The amount of emotion poured out over this lady, which I don't have a problem with in itself, but it became ridiculous. It became like a spiral, bigger and bigger and bigger, all the way around the world. It was a mass grieving. But it wasn't just about grieving for her. It was about grieving for the stuff inside you that you hadn't grieved for. This is how I look at it. So people were grieving for all the stuff they hadn't got round to grieving for. All this emotion was pouring out. Focus on Princess Diana, the Princess of Wales. But actually it was their own stuff. But it was out of control because people weren't grounded. So people were stirring it up in each other. What are we going to do? You know, it's all part of learning to be wise. And that doesn't come easily. And there are many people I'm sure we can think of that have gone right through their long lives, never been wise people. It's always making mistakes, but not learning from them.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with making mistakes. It's about you must learn from them.
Yeah.
Those are with you. But they're not mistakes. I sometimes beat myself up about something I might have done as a child or teenager or whatever. And I'm thinking, I wish I hadn't done that. And I'm thinking, why am I still worrying about that? I've got over that. Grow up, Jane.
Yeah, it is an experience at the end of the day, like we said before. Yeah. But yeah, wow, Jane, thank you so much. This has been just such a fascinating talk, and I can talk about this all day with you because there's just so much. But yeah, thank you. And if people wanted to find you or book a session with you, or any of the wonderful things that you do, they can find you on www.janebutterworth-spiritualhealth.co.uk.
Dash meaning hyphen, yeah. So Jane Butterworth hyphen spiritual
health. Spiritual health.
.co.uk, or just type in Jane Butterworth Healer and I'll come on the first page.
And it'll come up. Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you so much again for everything. And there's just so much to gain from this talk. We've covered like a vast majority of everything pretty much to do with the spiritual stuff. And I'm sure we'll catch up again.
Well, thank you so much. You've been a lovely interviewer. It's been lovely.
Thank you.
And lots of love, and thank you. Take care.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.